of these 10 tips is basically just me giving away the secret to my own park building. So if you want to know the evolution square method to building parks, stick around. Hello everyone and welcome to a new Jurassic World Evolution video. If you've just gotten the game for free on Epic Games a couple of days ago, or you've had it for a few years and you're thinking to yourself, there really isn't that much to do in terms of park design, is there? Well, I have a couple of tips for you to make park building a little more interesting. And by a couple, I mean 10. In case you haven't seen them, I've also done a video about how to create different biomes for your dinosaur exhibits and 10 exciting exhibit tips. You guys really enjoyed those videos, which is why I am back with 10 more things to make your parks a little bit more unique and interesting. What's different this time is that we'll also be exploring the possibilities provided by some mods, specifically the Better Fences mod by Mr. Troodon. The mods that I have implemented in my game right now are linked below. This means that some of these 10 tips I will show you in two ways. One without mods for the purists and the console players, and one with mods. Now, modding has had a huge breakthrough this week since they've cracked being able to add dinosaur species instead of replacing them. It's still in the early phases, there's still a lot of development left to go, but it does open up the exciting possibility of not just adding more dinosaur species, but also adding fences, paths, you know what I get excited about, paths, terrain paints, and foliage instead of replacing the existing ones. So the future of Jurassic World Evolution is looking bright, and that's all thanks to the modders. And as soon as those additions become reality, I will be incorporating them in tip videos and park builds, so stay tuned for that. For now, if these 10 little design elements inspire you for your own park, hit the thumbs up on this video, and for a lot more building tips and tricks, subscribe to the channel. The first fun little design element to use in your parks or perhaps in an exhibit is a dam. To make a dam, start with a river and create a lake at the end of it, which is at a little bit of a lower elevation. Not too much, because if you do too much, the distance will be too great and it won't look good. So just a little bit. You want the slope to have a slight curve to it, which mimics the curve of a dam. And while writing this, I actually realized dams curve the other way because physics. They're actually stronger when they're curved inwards. So a quick reverse of the design, although I secretly think the other one looks better. I added a power station because dams generate power, and it just adds that little bit more extra oomph. When doing this, do be careful not to place it too close because it will mess up with the terrain. Do as I say, not as I do. This design doesn't really change much without mods. It might actually, in my opinion, work better without mods because the concrete fences in the mod, in the Better Fences mod by Troodon, Mr. Troodon, the concrete fences are a little bit too high. Next up, which I think looks pretty cool in a big exhibit that you have a tour going through, is a fortress or a castle of sorts. And you can even have one of your dinosaurs turn it into more of a ruin. This one works much better with the fences mod, that has to be acknowledged, because of the different heights you get with those fences. Again, the mod is linked down below. For the new Epic gamers out there, it has been confirmed that you can mod the free version that you got via Epic Games as well. It's just as easy as modding the Steam version, so have at it, Hoss. For the console players, don't worry, we still have a lot of tips to go through that work just as well without the mods. For the fortress, for the corner pieces, I used the tall concrete fences with the support beams, and then I used the other closed wall type to create the outlines of the fortress. For a bit of a smaller tower at the center, or in my case, a little bit off center because I'm like, so quirky, just raise the terrain up a little bit, but make sure not to raise the fences you already put down or they will just end up looking wonky. I added a bridge to the fortress and a moat surrounding it and filled the open space with path. Now this will work even better without the snow mod, which I do have installed, because then you can use the dark brown of the rock texture to fill in the gaps between the fences and the path. You can then drop in a Brachiosaurus or an Indominus and turn on habitat requirements and escapes to turn this fortress into a ruin. Of course, you can play around with how the fortress looks, how big it is, where you place the towers, etc. This is just to give you a quick bit of building inspiration using the fences. Unmodded, I'd say just use the concrete fences. You'd have no height difference at all, but you can still get the point across. My third tip is to never just have a long path go from point A to point B in your park, but to always add a little bit of flair to it, and in this example, a little bit of monorail flair. I am a big fan of building with the monorail tracks. I think this is well established. You can use the monorail to make arches over your pathways that you can pretend function as the entry point to different parts of your park, like one leads into a rainforest section and the other one into a redwood section, that sort of thing. With a single circle of monorail, you can also make a cool little roundabout that splits the path up in several different directions, and this just breaks up those infinite paths that you have going from one point of your park to another. Both of these work equally well with or without mods. You can also build a long tunnel using the monorail, which is a little bit more work, but in my opinion, it is well worth the effort. This is a little bit nicer with the mixed era mod and the fences mod, because then you can use the placeable lights and a low fence in combination with the monorail, but it's also fine without the addition of the lights and just using the regular light steel fence. I use an extra path as a guideline, so I place my tracks at the exact same distance from the main path every time, and I extend it on both sides, so that I can get the next bit of track closer to the previous one. If I leave it open-ended, the next track just wants to snap to it, and it needs to be further away to prevent that. I love flanking this tunnel on both sides with mountains and forests, so it really adds to that feel of being in a tunnel. And I think it's really cool to have a big mountain range in your park and then have this tunnel come through it, connecting the sections at opposite ends. It looks especially great at nighttime because the tracks also have little lights on them. Next up is a Dinosaur Parade, which essentially just means connecting two exhibits with a bit of pathing lined with viewing galleries. If you really want to put in the effort and you are just a smidge sadistic, you can put the food only in one exhibit and the water only in the other to force the dinosaurs to regularly move back and forth. And at the length that I had it, they were still able to detect the food on the far side, so it does work. But my dinosaurs were fresh out of the hatchery, so they were already low on food and water, which meant their health plummeted pretty quickly. You'd have to keep an eye on that. It's certainly not something that that's for me. But for a park, I think it makes sense to want to make this kind of a spectacle out of it. You could just play pretend that 2 times a day the dinosaurs get herded from one exhibit to another, and it would be like an event in your park. This was actually inspired by a scene in the first season of Camp Cretaceous, where they herded the dinosaurs back and forth along a narrow strait that guests could zipline across. Whether or not you use mods is really irrelevant for this idea. I didn't use any for this specific example. A tip that comes straight out of my Mesozoic Metropolis build is a particular way to make bridges, which I think looks really cool. It's a combination of path, fence, arches from the monorail track, and power lines to simulate cables. With the Mixed Eras mod, you can use the darker path from the JP era, but the normal grey path from the Jurassic World era works just as well. With the Better Fences mod, I'd use the low fences as railing, but if you don't have that mod, you can use the light steel fencing as railing. Given the limitations of the game, I think this is a pretty decent looking bridge. It has a nice level of detail to it, which I think makes it convincing. But you can be the judge of that. Something that comes out of my Winter Wonderland park is the layout for the Jurassic World hotels, which I really like. The hotels themselves look great, but it is a bit of a challenge to find a good layout for them because they are asymmetrical. My new favorite thing to do is to combine 2 of them and have them facing in opposite directions. I think this is the best way to line them up, and with the use of fancy path and sand, you can create a unified hotel area, which you can flank on both sides with shops and stuff. I personally really like this. Normally, I struggle with how to add hotels, and usually just place one next to another facing the exact same way, but it never looks great to me. And I've actually had this question from the community a couple of times as well, asking for good layout for hotels, so I figured I'd add it to my little list of tips. I really like how clean and purposeful this looks, and if you repeat this once or twice throughout the park, you have plenty of hotel capacity. A little tip in between is to use double fencing. It's pretty on the nose, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel over here, but I think this is something that is oftentimes overlooked. Especially if you have fencing which is electrified, it just looks more realistic and interesting to add a little bit of double fencing. It seems reasonable to try and keep your guests from coming into contact with 10,000 volts. This tip does work nice with the Better Fences mod from Mr. Troodon using the low fencing, but again, you can also just substitute the light steel fencing. I know, it's a very small thing to do in your parks, but it has a big impact on overall realism. It's adding small elements like this that really add up when you look at the end result. A lot of people ask me how to make a mountain range, so I figured I'd include it in this list of 10 tips. I think people struggle with it because the terrain raising tool is so slow that it makes it annoying. But adding different elevation is so important to making your parks look better that you really can't just flatten a map and leave it at that. What I always do is I raise it a little bit, I flatten enough of that to be able to use the water brush, and then I create the first plateau. The water brush works a lot faster than the terrain raising or terrain leveling, so that prevents, you know, early onset of boredom. I repeat this to create a higher plateau, and this way you can quickly get some height and get the base shape of your mountain range. Then you use the raise tool to create the ridge of the mountain. And what I always do is drag up from the foot of the mountain to create interesting shapes on the side of the mountain. Other tips for your mountain is to add a little bit of rock texture with a light touch using the big brush, and then add some veins of rock using the smallest brush. Using sand, you can more or less simulate snow-capped mountains. It's not ideal, I admit that, but as always in this game, you gotta use your imagination. To turn a mountain into a volcano, what I always do is I flatten the top of the mountain just a little bit so I can place a rock there, and then I raise the terrain around that rock. This just makes sure that the divot in the center of the volcano remains as low as possible and as sharp as possible. You can delete the rock afterwards for a flat crater, I suppose, at the top, but I decided to leave it. Like it's like a mound of dried lava. Even though volcanoes can have snow at the top, obviously, I get rid of the snow and make the top rocky instead, again just pretending that it's dried lava, and I add little rivers of dried lava going down the side of the volcano as well. Since volcano soil is very rich in nutrients, I add lots of shrubbery and trees for the end result. I came across an idea on the subreddit a long time ago, and I saved the screenshot and I want to share it with you in this video. I was actually planning on one day doing a video with 10 design tips from Reddit, but honestly, not to diss the Redditors, but park inspiration is few and far between, unfortunately. It's mostly just look at Mario and Luigi in the game and look at how old my Struthiomimus is. This tip though I really liked, and it's by user LordVader2864. He also has a YouTube channel called Godzilla's World where he posted this video. But what he did was use a combination of the monorail tracks, power lines, and concrete fencing to make an enclosure for the Indoraptor. I thought that was pretty badass, also for the likes of like an Indominus Rex or a T-Rex. I would only improve on this by leaving the outer pillars of the monorail tracks intact. In the original by Godzilla's World, the pillars of the monorail track were deleted by the fence and power lines. The roof, quote unquote the roof, feels a little too heavy to be supported by the posts of the power lines alone. But yeah, it's a pretty cool idea that I wanted to share with everyone and put my own spin on it, but credit goes to the person who came up with it. So now for the ultimate evolution square tip. This is what I do when I don't know what to do. If you know this, you can build like Evolution Square. Before I give away my secret power, please do consider subscribing to the channel. It would really mean so much to me, and I promise I have more of where this came from. Alright, this might be a bad idea, but here we go. Let's say you've watched all of my park building tips and tour videos, and you liked, commented, and subscribed, and you still need more. In that case, you can go directly to my source of power, Google. It's honestly as simple as that. I get my inspiration from lots of random things like movies, TV series, a pattern in floor tiles, all sorts of stuff. But when I need to go look for inspiration, here are the literal things that I Google, which really help me along with my park design. I translate these into path art, park layouts, guest area layouts, or just use them to get the creative juices flowing. I haven't fallen back on this very often. I think there are only a few parks where I really had to draw from images like this, but it's a good safety net to have, and I wanted to share that with you. Keep these in mind for when Prehistoric Kingdom comes around the corner, because then we can get a lot more literal in our inspiration. We don't have randomized islands in Jurassic World Evolution, but you can use the big Nublar 1993 map to create your own randomized islands. The workable space becomes a little bit smaller, but you can challenge yourself with new island shapes that you should really stick to, and Googling fantasy maps or even just using Google Earth can really inspire you to create interesting island shapes. If you Google zoo layout, it actually yields a lot of Planet Zoo results, which is pretty funny, but those can still be really helpful for a Jurassic World Evolution park as well. The key here is to not take things too literally, because due to the limitations of the game, you can't literally copy these things. You have to find inspiration in them. And not to get too salty, but people mess this up all the time. Taking inspiration does not equal copying. Even if you can't copy something, you can still find inspiration in it. You just need to know to break it down and look at the elements that you can use. There's one console player, there's probably more console players, but there's one who's very outspoken, who is particularly angry because now that I'm using mods, they can't get inspiration from me anymore. Oh, hell nah, you just can't copy my homework anymore. Anyway, look up images that attract you and try to figure out for yourself how you can implement certain elements of that in your park builds. Especially when it comes to layouts and such, these Google searches are really helpful, and once you have a good layout, the rest is honestly just a case of filling in the blanks. If how you do that is still a little bit fuzzy to you, let me know in a comment down below. Perhaps I can make a video where I build a park using references like this, so you can see how to translate these images from concept art, in which anything is possible, to a Jurassic World Evolution park in which very little is possible. And while you're down there, let me know which of these tips is your favorite, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe for more. I'm currently building a Jurassic World franchise around the world, starting in Moscow. The first video is up on the channel and the next will come soon. I hope you'll enjoy. For now, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy the game.